I think it's this idea that, PR is a marathon, not a sprint. So if you're going to engage a PR firm, I think you need to be in it with the mindset that this is a long-term relationship.
You're listening to Relish This, the Purpose Marketing Podcast. Here's your host, Stu Swineford.
Hey everybody, Stu here. My guest today is Rhiannon Hendrickson. She is the founder and CEO of Orapin Marketing. And they are a really great PR firm that does a lot of work in the nonprofit space. And so they have this really cool approach to how they help nonprofits get their story out there. And it's really first a matter of commitment, really committing to the process and committing to getting your story out there, and then really understanding your story. And it's less about what you do and why you do it, and more about why people should actually care about what you're up to and why it matters. And our discussion today, I think, is really great for any nonprofit seeking to expand their mission and amplify their story. We had a really fun time talking with Rhiannon. So here we go. I hope you enjoy the show. Hey, Rhiannon, how are you today?
I'm good, Stu. Thanks for having me on. I'm excited to chat.
Oh, it is entirely my pleasure. I'm really, really excited to continue our conversation. I looked at my calendar and we actually chatted like 3 years ago. I don't know how we got connected way back then, but then we most recently reconnected in February and had a nice little talk. Yeah. And I'm excited to hear about everything that is going on with PR and how that affects the nonprofit space.
For sure. Yeah. No, I know I was kind of doing the same thing as to when we first connected and how, and I don't know, it seems like anything pre-pandemic these days could have been, February of last year or in 2014. Who knows? Yeah,
it's amazing how that time has both compressed and extended. It seems like it's a really weird phenomenon that we're all going through.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what are your main things that you're providing for nonprofits these days?
Yeah, I think the main thing is really just helping them to expand their audience by telling their story. One of the things that we find with organizations is that they typically tend to be better at engaging their current audience and staying in touch with current donors and clients, but maybe not as good about, really getting the story out there in a broader sense and bringing more people into their family, if you will.
Yeah, those are the kind of those pre-engagement phases of the audience life cycle. We like to call those the attract and connect phases that then kind of blend into bond. But yeah, I think a lot of nonprofits do a decent job with the inspire phase, which is where you have someone and they've either taken an action and are a repeat donor or are a volunteer, but re-engaging with those people feels a lot more comfortable for a lot of nonprofits, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because they feel like these are folks who already agree with them, support them, love them. And so naturally you're inclined to, want to stay connected and really engage with them. But we need to be we need to also be telling other people about what we do, why it matters, and why they should care and support us.
Yeah. So with PR, we've worked with a number of PR firms over the years, and have some familiarity with what all the magic that you perform behind the scenes. What are some of the things that you recommend for nonprofits who are trying to get, expand their mission and amplify their message? What are some PR related activities that you see working really well?
Yeah, I think, first and foremost, it's making the commitment to tell the story and engage a broader audience. I think so often nonprofit, we're really busy and there's a lot going on, and PR tends to be kind of last on the list. And I'd argue that it should be closer to the top, that yes, the services that you're providing are critical and paramount, but in order to provide those services, you need to have the support of donors and funders, et cetera. And so, I think once you make the commitment to do it regularly and to, really figure out what is the story, why should people care about it, and why does it matter to them? And just starting to make introductions and reach out to folks. And I think so often people are scared to just take that first step. So engaging your local, newspaper and sharing stories of local, clients who in your area have benefited from your work and your services. Tell those human interest stories.
Yeah, is there, we kind of talk about that as our value proposition in terms of really letting people have a good understanding of not only why they should give to your organization and not another organization, but also overcome that friction of not giving at all. I mean, the nonprofit space just has this additional challenge that isn't quite as prevalent in the for-profit world, where parting with money to support a nonprofit is, there's a lot of friction there. And I love that you're talking about storytelling, because I think that that's something that nonprofits actually have the benefit of, is that they have something really compelling to talk about. I know at Relish Studio, we embarked on a PR campaign many years ago. And one of the things we pretty quickly realized is we hadn't figured out our story yet. And so there wasn't really anything for the press to bite on.
Yeah.
How do you help nonprofits kind of craft that story or tease that idea out to really get press interested?
Yeah, I think one of the things, especially with organizations that are new to PR, it's this idea, they have this idea that we exist and therefore people should care. And I would challenge that. No, the fact that you exist is actually not that interesting.
Right.
It's why you exist. It's the so what factor. The fact that you exist and you do this great work is awesome and admirable, but you have to answer the so what question so that people actually care, because they're not going to open up their checkbooks unless you can get them to care. And they're not going to care unless they understand, why does what you're doing actually matter to your constituents, to the community, and to the folks you're reaching themselves, your potential donors themselves.
Yeah, we have really started to try to help our clients figure out how to like hit people in the feels, where it's like you can tell the story, but if you can really get to this idea of how it's going to make them feel, the donor themselves, to support this cause, and not only how far the money is going to go and how it's directed toward helping people on the recipients of the benefit, but how is the giving of that investment going to make the person feel when when they pull out their checkbook?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and again, sorry, I go back to having the commitment, making the commitment to get your story out there, but also, like you said, figuring out what the story is, and then finding the right channels or opportunities to tell that story. So maybe it's through the media. Maybe it's, by speaking at local events. Maybe it's by, contributing articles, writing op-eds or letters to the editor. There's a lot of ways in which you can tell that story and demonstrate your expertise, because I think oftentimes leaders of nonprofits forget that they are experts in this area, especially those who have worked in the field and, for a specific cause for a really long time. They know a lot about the issue at hand and the opportunities and the various solutions to solve that problem. So they should be using their voice and, sharing that information with folks to help them better understand the problem that they're working to solve.
Yeah, that's really great advice. I think that a lot of people do. It seems like particularly in the nonprofit space, there's a lot of humility, and people are very humble and don't think of themselves as necessarily experts. But man, they bring a lot of expertise to the table in terms of all sorts of different things that are tangential to maybe the main mission that their nonprofit is embarked upon, and just getting out there and being that thought leader can really bring people into the fold.
Absolutely. Yeah, it helps to establish their credibility. I mean, especially when you look at, I don't even remember, I don't know what the number is these days, but the number of nonprofits out there is, astonishing. And so many of them serve to solve the same problem, right? Maybe in a different way. But if you're targeting donors want to feel confident in the money that they're giving and that it's going to be used wisely and that it's going to be, have an actual impact. And so if you can demonstrate that you are the credible, you're a credible opportunity for them to spend their money and to help support a cause they care about, that's going to help to increase donations.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned that. My guest, we recorded yesterday, but he will be on live the week before your show drops. We had the same conversation about building trust and how, that's kind of the key component to, getting people to engage in the first place, but then getting them to continue to support you as a nonprofit is just hammering on that trust. And that really comes about from a variety of different activities. It doesn't just have to be necessarily the results of what you're doing, although obviously we're always looking for results. But if you can be a regular speaker at events or on TV or wherever one might go to speak, that leads to that credibility and that trust that you're just filling up that bank.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's the old adage, people, work with or buy from or donate to or support those that they know, like, and trust.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think when you're looking at how do you tell your story and what story are you going to tell, put it through that filter and that perspective. Is the story going to help people to like us or to get to know us better, to get to better understand who we are, what we do, and what we stand for? Does this story and is what I'm saying helping people, to build credibility and enhance our reputation and get people to trust us? Those are really important things to remember.
Yeah, I think that's something that people maybe don't think about when they think of PR is, I think most people, when they think of public relations, they think about, earned media or paid media or, just there's always this kind of media tie-in. And so it's nice to hear that there's some other opportunities that people can consider when they're looking to perhaps engage a PR firm.
Yeah, for sure. And I think if we talk about the like part of the know, like, and trust, I think nonprofits, like you said earlier, they tend, folks in the nonprofit world tend to be very humble. And I can understand that. But I think also think about how are you humanizing the organization? How do you bring that personality to the organization? A lot of nonprofits are tackling really difficult issues. And so obviously you don't want it to be all doom and gloom. Mm-hmm. But you also don't want it to be all rainbows and sunshine either. I think there needs to be a balance between the two of like, here's the great work that we're doing and here's the, amazing impact that we're having. But we also need to look at like, here's the problems that, we're faced with, and here's the reality of the current situation. Give people something to relate to and to connect with.
Right. It's funny that you mentioned that too, because when you think of a a Hollywood film, for example, if a film just came at the audience with, everything's great or everything's terrible, you'd you would either get kind of bored or there's just no arc, and there's no tension, and there's no drive to continue to pay attention to this. And so I think that, again, with that storytelling piece, is don't be afraid to embrace some of the downs, because that's just part of a story. Your hero goes through a journey, and they, face some sort of challenge, and then, their friend is lost in some sort of catastrophic event, and then they climb back out and get to a new high, and then some other thing happens. And so, it's a bunch of ups and downs. And that's what makes a compelling story.
Absolutely. Yeah. If all you're saying is look at the amazing impact we're having and how great, we're solving this problem, people are like, awesome, you're doing fine. You don't need my support. I'm going to support somebody else, right? Or if all you're saying is, oh my gosh, we don't have enough money and there's so many people that need our services that we can't help. It's like, well, maybe you're just, the door is halfway shut and there's no reason to support you either. So
yeah, maybe you're not good at this.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's just really fun to kind of break these things down and see how people are tackling these challenges. What are some of the bigger challenges that you do see with nonprofits in either deciding to engage with PR? What are some of the things that they should think about before reaching out to someone like you?
I think one of the most common things we see with nonprofits, and we talked about it earlier, but this idea around we're doing really great work, but nobody knows about us. And this kind of almost victim mentality, like, why are other people or other organizations getting so much attention? And the answer is, it's not because they're necessarily doing better work or having better outcomes or making a bigger impact. It's because they've made the commitment to tell the story and to put themselves out there. The media world especially is incredibly saturated, and from a traditional media standpoint, increasingly shrinking. Like there's just fewer and fewer reporters and outlets out there. They will not find you. That's the simple truth. They are just not going to find you because you exist. You have to be proactive and committed to telling your story and getting people to care about it. So yeah, if you're watching the nightly news and you're like, well, that organization's great and all, but we're actually doing something better or more interesting or what have you, the reason they're on the news is because they chose to put themselves out there to create that opportunity for themselves. The other thing I think people forget about, and people think of PR as in getting media attention, but I think we lose sight of the fact that you can create your own attention too. There are tons of opportunities out there besides just having a reporter write a story about you to, expand that audience and bring more awareness to what you're doing. So don't forget about those and there's other channels, whether it's through social media, whether it's through events and speaking opportunities, whether it's through writing your own articles about yourself and the work that you're doing. Don't just rely and wait for a reporter to come to you to say they want to, do a story about your organization.
So is it a consistency of activities that helps PR firm or helps nonprofits to get the traction that they might be looking for? Or is it just knocking on the right doors at the right time, which I guess, comes back down to consistency? What do you see working for people, when they really are trying to get that message out there?
The answer is yes to both questions. Yeah, it's the commitment and the consistency.
Okay.
It's dedicating resources, whether that's somebody in an actual person, an internal resource, whether it's budget, whether it's time, whatever it is, to saying, this is important to us, and we are going to consistently make an effort to do something. I think in terms of your question of what do they need to think about when they, want to engage a PR firm, or they want to, just get some PR support, whether that's having, somebody do it for them or having somebody guide them and help them stay accountable to doing it themselves. It's first and foremost, understanding what the actual story is. The fact that you exist isn't the story. Let's dig a bit deeper, finding, and then those, the offshoot storylines. What else can you be talking about as it relates to your impact, the problem you're working to solve, whatever it might be? What are the various ways we can, we can tell that story and point back to this, central message?
Yeah, that's great. That's great advice.
Yeah, and I was also going to say, so figuring out what the story is, and then just figuring out what resources you're going to put towards it, and get started. Everything, it starts to build momentum. If you think of PR PR stands for public relations, and I view that as building relationships with your publics or your various stakeholder audiences. You don't build a relationship with somebody overnight. It takes time, and it takes effort, and it takes engagement. So thinking through kind of this long-term approach will help. In the same way you do, with donor cultivation, it's kind of the same thing.
Interesting. Yeah, it's yeah, I love that you bring up it's all about relationships, because that's certainly how we think of marketing. Even is, you're really just trying to establish that you have something of value, whether that's expertise or a widget that you're selling, that somebody is going to want to trade their time or money or energy for.
Mm-hmm.
And it's sometimes easier to do that than others, but in the nonprofit space, it can be a real challenge, because the thing that people are going to get from their investment, whether that be time or money, is a lot less tactile or tangible than when you're buying a doohickey from the local store.
For sure.
So when nonprofits are starting to embark on this journey, to expand their reach and start to spread the word about what they do and what they do really well, my guess is that a lot of times they try to DIY it before they come to someone like you who's an expert in this. Are there any tricks that you can share that they can either get people to understand that they need to hire a pro, or things that they can do to maybe tee that initial DIY experience up a little bit more effectively?
It's an interesting question. I mean, I think first and foremost, I think where I see organizations get hung up when they DIY is that they just start doing stuff. And while, yes, my advice is just get started, I also want to caution organizations from just let's just send a pitch to a reporter.
Right.
I mean, maybe that'll land. Maybe you hit the reporter at the right time, at the right moment, and the story just lands. It's great. But if all you're doing is throwing spaghetti at a wall and seeing what sticks, you're not going to truly understand what works and why it's working. So we always start with, let's put together an actual plan. Let's really define our goals and objectives and understand what we want to ultimately achieve and how we're going to measure that. And then from there, it's, let's test things. Let's see what sticks. Let's do a bunch of different things, see what works, and whether or not it is actually helping to move the needle. Can we say that article did in fact, increase donations or bring more people to it, whatever it might be that an organization wants to do? If you don't have clear goals and objectives, you can't really understand what the ROI is. And if you can't understand what the ROI is, it's going to be really hard to stick with it when you're not seeing results right away.
Right. Yeah. We look at that as like, do you have, even if you have your goals set and you know where you want to go, are you actually creating an opportunity to measure the activities that you're doing, to see if they're producing the results that you were actually, hoping to achieve?
Yeah.
And I think that that's something that gets missed in digital campaigns as well, where there's just no real way to understand if it worked or didn't work.
Yeah. Well, and I think if you're not asking the question of why do we want to reach out to this reporter, and how can we point back to a specific objective to see if they do write a story, how we're going to determine if it met that objective, you lose the opportunity to really understand what the call to action would be. People say like, well, we just want a story in the newspaper. Okay, great. But what do you want the story to be about? Oh, we want it to be about, this recent, campaign we just did. Okay. And then what? Like, what is it that you want that to actually do? If you keep digging, then you can better understand like, oh, well, we wanted people to go to the website. Okay, cool. Well, how are we going to actually measure that? Well, I guess we can look at referral traffic from that news outlet and see what that looks like. So we just, connect the dots and really, even if it feels intuitive, answer those questions to be really clear about what it is you want to try. And I mean, maybe it won't work, but you're not going to understand if it worked, truly understand if it worked or if it didn't, if you're not asking those questions up front and getting really clear about that stuff up front.
Yeah, for sure. It's interesting how many times we'll go back through a client's traffic and see some crazy spike that happened on some day in the past, and and maybe this is before our engagement, but we say, oh well, that's interesting. What did you guys do? On the 13th of July to get that huge spike? And they're like, I don't know. Yeah. And so, or they have to think back about it. So, just documenting activities, it seems mundane. But if if you can figure out what's leading to, those donation spikes or even traffic spikes, it's way easier to repeat that if you have an understanding of what you were up to, versus just guessing.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
Do you tend to see nonprofits start to want PR assistance or benefit more from PR assistance when they've reached a certain maturity level or a certain size? What's the kind of the sweet spot that you've seen people really start to engage effectively with PR? Is it across the board?
I think it's once they've, had enough opportunities to make an impact and to show that, like, the fact that they exist isn't interesting. The fact that they exist to solve a specific problem isn't interesting. The fact that they exist to solve a specific problem and here are the outcomes that they're having to impact a specific problem, that then becomes more interesting. So, having startups, I think startup nonprofits are difficult. Depending on, there could be opportunities to tell like a founder story of what happened in a founder's life that led them to starting this organization. I mean, that story can be interesting, possibly, but that can be short-lived too. I think to really, benefit from a real PR effort, you're going to want to have enough time and, outcomes and successes and failures under your belt to make it a more interesting story.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, it just all comes back down to that storytelling and what are people going to find compelling, that are going to make them want to engage with your organization.
Exactly.
How did you start working with nonprofits? What's your story in that space?
So I have worked with in nonprofit my entire career. I started my career in-house in a local nonprofit organization, doing both fundraising and communications. And then, as I've evolved throughout my career, have, volunteered for various nonprofits, served on the board of various nonprofits, and has, many different nonprofit clients. I am really drawn to people and organizations that are doing something for good, like for the greater good. And obviously, I mean, that's the nonprofit realm, right? Like I love that kind of storytelling. I love the stories of, how we're helping people and how people's lives are getting, being made better through the work that we're doing, whether that is nonprofit or for-profit organizations.
Yeah, it's fun to see the for-profit space start to embrace this idea of corporate social responsibility, or you talk a lot about B Corps. Even some of the organizations out there, like 1% for the Planet, that Relish is a partner of. It feels like there's a movement and a real trend toward businesses of all types trying to figure out how to navigate this space of commerce in a positive way, and bring a lot more benefit to everybody, as opposed to just trying to fuel revenue and profits. So it's really cool to see that change. Do you feel like that shift has taken some of the opportunities away from nonprofits, who historically have been kind of the owners of that area,
domain,
or does it augment it?
Probably both. I think, the for-profit mindset is more inclined to put resources and budget toward marketing and PR, whereas nonprofits maybe are less inclined to do so.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore they're creating their own opportunities, right? But I think nonprofits still have a really interesting role to play. And especially, I think there's a great opportunity for nonprofits to look at how could we collaborate on these stories together.
Mm-hmm.
If you have a nonprofit and, a for-profit organization both working to solve the same problem or in some way impact the problem, how can we, how do we tell that story in a joint way? And it's kind of like a bigger picture story, right? Like, here's this problem, and here's a nonprofit that's been working to solve it for X number of years, and this is the success that they've had and the failures that they've had. And here's a for-profit who's just entering into the space, and as a nonprofit with expertise, here's what we recommend, or here's what we think these for-profit organizations should know or should be thinking about, and where we're really excited for them to be a part of this solution.
Yeah, that's really great insight. I took a little class of, gosh, it's been a few months since I took it, but it was talking a lot about corporate social responsibility, and how, from the nonprofit standpoint, there are not only some opportunities that probably get left on the table, but also some pitfalls to look out for. And as more and more for-profit businesses go out to try and find nonprofit partners to kind of be the beneficiary of the for-profit's CSR efforts, there can be a challenge in that if there's not good alignment with either mission or values or something, then you lose that opportunity to tell a story. So, for example, if you have some big company wanting to come and throw a bunch of volunteers at your nonprofit, but the big company doesn't have anything to do with what you as the nonprofit is, your mission is,
Mm-hmm.
then there's really no way to take advantage of that other than the benefit of getting some volunteer help.
Right.
But if you can get alignment, so if you can find, a for-profit business that's in, let's say they're in the outdoor space, and your nonprofit is a trail building organization, there's synergy there, and there's an ability for both parties to really effectively tell that story. And so just making sure that those things are aligned. And then the other piece is, we've done some work with a company called TapCat, and they run sweepstakes for nonprofits. And one of the things that we've seen with the most successful, or some of the more successful sweepstakes that get run, are for nonprofits who do have some kind of corporate sponsorship opportunity, where they can actually leverage the reach of that for-profit business's social media or audience, to get more people engaged in the sweepstakes. And so just making sure that people know that there's kind of a two-way street opportunity there. So it's just cool to see how both sides can kind of get some real benefit from those engagements, and bring a lot of juice to the conversation, in terms of that storytelling piece.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, if you look at, the myriad different problems out there, social, environmental, economic, what have you, there's likely not a problem out there that there's not a nonprofit working to solve or working towards, right? But there, I think just more recently, you're getting the for-profits engaged in solving those problems. And to your point, there's opportunities for both to benefit. The, for-profits that want to get involved in this space and, really work to solve these problems and to be a part of, making an impact, can lean on the nonprofits to learn, like, what have they been doing? What's worked? What hasn't worked? Where are the gaps? How can they start to fill those gaps? And the nonprofits can, I've not worked with any nonprofit that hasn't said, gosh, if we only had X, we could do Y, right? And oftentimes for-profits have that X. They have the budget. They have the resources, the talent, the staffing. They have, just more ability to make time. So nonprofits can lean on those, their for-profit partners to really just enhance what they're doing.
Yeah, that's actually a really great point, that these nonprofits, if you have a corporate partnership or sponsorship or some sort of connection, you can actually leverage their the power of their marketing team or their PR team, or some of these things that they have them on retainer, for lack of a better word, and so they can kind of toss some bodies at the problem, and put people power to work. So it's not just can you get investment? So it's not just about getting cash, but what other opportunities are there that you could leverage to get your story out there in a more effective way?
Exactly.
Have you seen any trends in the PR space for nonprofits that you find interesting? Are there changes that have been happening that you can shed some light on? I know that this last year has been very chaotic, I guess, for lack of a better word, in terms of people having to try new things. But what are some of the things that nonprofits might want to keep on their radar?
Yeah, I think the top of my head, I mean, I'm sure there's many, but like I talked about before, just really taking ownership of the story and of getting it out there, and not relying so heavily on having somebody else tell the story for you. Looking at how do we create these opportunities to share our message and to share expertise. I think the expertise part, thought leadership, quote unquote, is all the rage now, or it's something that's really starting to take hold. And I think for-profit organizations and companies and leaders are really kind of starting to jump on this bandwagon. But I would love to see more nonprofit leaders step into this space and use their voice and really build their reputations as experts on the problems that they're working on, because they have that expertise and they should be, I feel like they have a responsibility in some ways to be sharing that, to be educating and teaching people about what they know and what they're trying to do.
So really just starting that process by doing searches to find out what speaking opportunities might be available for somebody in the area of influence that you and your nonprofit serve. Would that be the first step there? And then starting to build a relationship with that entity and see if you can get included as a speaker?
For sure. Yeah. From speaking opportunities to, writing articles and submitting articles. There's so many online outlets out there that offer contributor opportunities. You write the article and they maybe edit it a little bit, but then post it. So, take the time to write and to, find opportunities to do like what we're doing right now, be a guest on a podcast. Podcasts are huge, or, medium that's just blowing up right now. And there's so many niche podcasts and, really focused, targeted podcasts.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I think I read that there are something like 2 million podcasts out there right now that are maybe not all active. I think the stat that I read was, I want to say only 35% make it past their first 3 episodes.
Oh, wow.
Or something like that. And then there's another like third drop off to the 10th episode. But just the fact that there is that much activity and an opportunity, it's certainly worth exploring for people to really get out there and try and find these places where they can, get their message out there. Is that something that your PR firm helps with? If somebody in the nonprofit space were looking for either podcast or guest posting type opportunities?
Absolutely. Yeah. We really are focused in this thought leadership, expert positioning space, and, helping organizations that may not have as much quote, news, like they're launching new products, they're, launching these great partnerships, that kind of thing. But how we help them identify like what is the story that they have to tell. And most often it comes from this place of teaching and education and this message that they just want to share, this story that's worth telling. And we find those opportunities to help them tell. So yeah, through, writing and contributing articles, securing speaking engagements, interviews, etc.
In that podcasting space, do you recommend people approach podcasters with a topic idea, or what's the best way for them to start that kind of conversation?
Absolutely. So yeah, the best way to pitch, any reporter or, from a podcast host, listen to the show a handful of times, understand kind of the format, what they're talking about, what they care about, are there certain questions that they typically ask, that kind of thing. And then reach out to them and, you offer up like, here, based on, what you're talking about, the theme of the podcast, I think that I'd be a great guest because of X, Y, and Z. Here's my, credentials, and here's a handful of things that I could talk about that I think your listeners might be interested in. It's a great way to start that conversation.
I'm taking notes right now because I think this is something I would want to include in my show synopsis is just some tips like this. I think, just having that step by step, like here's how to get this done is super helpful. This seems like it's been the way to kind of pitch to reporters for years in terms of just saying, hey, here are several topics that I could discuss or even write about. And thinking of it, this is something that's kind of hard for people to embrace, but you don't have to write it before somebody agrees that that's the thing that they want written. So, I think if you could come up with, 5 or 10 kind of topic ideas, and then when somebody bites, then you can do the hard work of figuring out what you're going to say.
Exactly. I mean, if we're pitching byline articles, we're pitching a client to write an article for a publication, we'll say, here's, maybe 3 to 5 ideas. We pick like the ones that we think would be most fitting for that specific publication. And then explain why you think that it's fitting. I mean, prove that you understand the publication and the audience, not just that it's not just for the sake of benefiting you. No reporter or editor is going to care that it benefits you. They want to know how it benefits their audience. Why would their audience care to read an article from you on this thing? Like, why does it matter? And why are you the best person to write this article? And then include, just a quick, like a headline and maybe 3 to 5 bullet points as to what would be included in the article.
Okay.
I
That's
think
great.
Rather than just pitching them, hey, I already wrote this article, I would, even if you have already written the article, I wouldn't share it with them right away. I would, pitch them the idea first, because every publication has its own writer's guidelines where, a certain number of words, a certain style, that kind of thing. If you just send them the article, it doesn't give them the chance to make it their own. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
Like, I mean, they can edit it or whatnot, but I think it's a less assertive and less, demanding to say, hey, what do you think of this idea? And then let me write it specifically for you.
Yeah, I really love that approach. It's sort of the sell it before you build it mentality.
Yeah.
And it's a little scary, I guess. I certainly have struggled with it over the years, in terms of like, well, how can I sell something that I don't have? And the fact of the matter is you can go out and sell it or pitch it. And if there's no interest, then you haven't spent a bunch of time building something that no one actually wants.
Exactly.
So you can go back out and pitch the next thing and see if they want that. And as opposed to putting in, all of the time and effort and energy and, headache and heartache and and everything else to build something that no one actually has a strong interest in. Go ahead and gauge interest before you invest all that time and energy.
Absolutely. Or if you do, write it first and it's something that you love and think like, oh my gosh, this would be a great fit for XYZ publication. Again, just don't include that in the pitch. Save that, kind of behind the scenes, and just pull out the main points of the article and use that. And then, tweak it as need be.
Right.
Based on that.
And you can always use that on your own site. If no one bites and you still feel like there's value, you can use it elsewhere.
Exactly.
But I would also recommend, don't publish it before the person that you're pitching has the opportunity to do so, because they aren't going to probably want something that's been published before.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think another recommendation or approach some people take is shopping it, pitching a lot of people all at once and seeing who bites. I think there's risk in that, because if you have 2 publications that decide they want it, then how are you going to decide who gets it? It is definitely not this, we call it the spray and pray approach. Like, it should be very, very targeted. Here is a very specific article for this specific publication, because of these reasons. Every outlet, like, if you're parenting or whatever, like there's gosh knows how many number of parenting outlets out there, but each one has its own kind of niche or philosophy or what have you. So make it really, really targeted. And that's how you're going to build a relationship with that publication and that editor.
Yeah, I can see how it would cause some real problems if you had several people interested in your article all at once, how you could end up kind of torpedoing the whole thing because of the competing desires. And also people like to feel like they're special, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
So if if you're just out there slinging it goes back to your throwing spaghetti at the wall idea. If you're just out throwing everything out there, you don't, it's just so untargeted that you don't know how to measure. And then also you can get yourself into trouble.
Yep, absolutely.
Are there any other things about engaging a PR firm or taking that leap into PR aside from all the great stuff that we've chatted about that you'd want nonprofit leaders to know about before they started thinking about that as maybe one of their next steps in starting to build those relationships?
I think it's this idea that PR is a marathon, not a sprint. Mm-hmm. So if you're going to engage a PR firm, I think you need to be in it with the mindset that this is a long-term relationship. Now, I'm not saying years and years, but to launch a true strategic PR program that will hopefully bring about, a meaningful return on investment, it's going to take time. It just is. It's going to take time to really understand the opportunities, to start trying things and testing things, and to start to build that momentum. I mean, just because, if you get a reporter interested in your story, doesn't mean that story is going to publish tomorrow. It could take 3, 4, 5, 6 months to actually see it in print.
Right.
So it takes time to build that momentum. But once you get it going, the consistency and those results you'll start to see that consistency of results.
Yeah, my guess is once you get get traction on a couple things, you start to see it get easier and easier to get traction on other ideas and other pitches that you're doing out there.
Absolutely. Yeah. And one thing leads to another. I was talking with a potential client yesterday about the idea they really want to, be in these national publications. And while I think the story is certainly worthy of that, I caution them not to overlook the power of local press as well. Because the Today Show isn't going to have you on if you can't prove that you could be a good guest or that you have the ability to do a good interview, so use the local opportunities to build that credibility and to build your PR resume.
Yeah. And also just practice. It's tough to get out on the big stage the first time that you do something, enable yourself to get a little bit of practice under your belt before you jump to the nationwide or worldwide audience. Absolutely. Sometimes that can be helpful.
Well, if you think of the, whether it be, a newspaper, broadcast TV, big conference or event, they all work really hard to build their audience and to maintain their audience. And so they're not going to just give you airtime or space if they don't think you're going to be valuable to their audience, because they don't want to risk losing their audience.
Right.
So you have to be able to prove that you're worthy of that opportunity.
Right. I mean, we need to take, small steps to get where we're going. And I could see why, a large conference, for example, wouldn't necessarily want to put somebody up on stage who'd never done that before or wasn't proven. they have a lot at stake there.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I think we've probably all been to an event where the speaker was kind of meh, and you didn't necessarily leave the talk thinking meh about the speaker. You left it more like the negativity was more on the conference, why would they put that person up there?
Right. Or, I spent a lot of money on this thing and I had to sit through that.
Yeah.
And it's definitely not the, it's not the speaker themselves that typically takes the brunt of that, of that, disengagement or dissatisfaction for sure.
Or they're not the only one, let's say. Yeah. The conference get hit with that too. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I can't believe it's been an hour. This has been such a fun conversation. I really appreciate you being on the show today, Rhiannon. I'd love for you to let us know, let the audience know where they can find out more about you and all the great work that you're doing.
Oh, I appreciate that. Yeah. And thank you for the opportunity. It's been a great conversation. So I am the founder and CEO of Orapin Marketing and Public Relations. And our mission is to bring attention to those who are, doing good things out in the world. So you can check us out at orapinmarketing.com. That's ORAPIN marketing.com. And we also have an interview series called Inspired Impact, where we share the stories of purpose-driven leaders who are making a difference in the world and giving them an opportunity to talk about who they are, what they do, the impact that they're making, and how others can support them. So I encourage you to check that out too.
Yeah, for sure. And do you typically talk mostly with nonprofit leaders on Inspired Impact?
It's both nonprofit and for-profit. Like we were talking about earlier, it's been a really exciting shift to be able to include more for-profit leaders who are focused on, this business as a force for good mentality.
That's great. I love it. Well, this has been such a great conversation, and I love having these kinds of conversations and being able to talk about marketing and the nonprofit space and how more people can do more good in that space. But I also like to inspire actual action. And so at the end of every show, I ask my guest if there's one thing that you would have the people who are listening today do after listening to the show. What would you have people do today?
I would say really focus on clarifying that story. What do we do? What does it matter? And who should care? And then diving deeper and saying, okay, as we write this out and we get this on paper, really answering that so what question. So what? So what does this mean? So why should people care? What do we want them to do specifically? So get clear on that. And then, like I said before, just make the commitment to start putting yourself out there and telling that story.
Well, I think that's a really good thing for everyone to do is to get, figure out that process and figure out that story, whether it's personally or for one's organization. I think that's a good exercise to embark upon.
For sure.
Yeah. Thank you so much for being on the show. I had such a great time, and I will hopefully hear some really great stories coming out of Orapin.
Wonderful. Well, thanks again for having me. I appreciate it.
It's been my pleasure. I'll talk to you soon.
Take care.
Bye. All right, there you have it. Another great episode of Relish This. Thanks for listening. If you would like to learn more about how to apply the audience engagement cycle to expand your organization's mission, there are two things you can do. Right now, you can go to missionuncomfortablebook.com to download a copy of my book. And while you're there, you can get your purpose-driven marketing score to see where you can unearth some gold for your organization. If you'd like to listen to back episodes of the show or sign up to be a guest, go to relishstudio.com/podcast. That's it for this week. I'll be back next week for another great episode of Relish This.